My name is Sarah, and at 32 years old, I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office across from the mother who abandoned me at 16. Margaret avoided my eyes while her son Tyler, my half brother, scrolled through his phone. The tension in that wood paneled room could have been cut with a knife. 16 years ago, she left me with $500 and empty promises to follow a wealthy man to California. Now, here we were waiting to hear about Uncle William's will. Before I share what happened in that room, I'm curious where you're watching from today. Please hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt abandoned by family. Your support means everything. And trust me, what unfolds next will leave you speechless. Growing up with my mother Margaret in our small Philadelphia apartment shaped who I became in ways I couldn't understand until much later. She worked two jobs to keep us afloat: mornings at the grocery store as a cashier and evenings waitressing at a local diner. Despite the exhaustion that permanently lived under her eyes, she tried to make our life feel normal. Friday nights were our movie nights where we'd make popcorn on the stove and watch whatever was on cable. She taught me how to cook using whatever we had in the pantry, turning simple ingredients into meals that felt special. I remember watching her count change at the kitchen table, making sure we had enough for rent, and the way her shoulders would relax when the numbers worked out. But there was always this undercurrent of unhappiness that I could sense even as a child. Sometimes I'd wake up at night to get water and find her sitting alone in the dark living room, crying quietly into a dish towel. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd force a smile and tell me she was just tired. I believed her then, but looking back, I realized she was mourning the life she thought she'd have by now. She'd been young when she had me, just 19, and my father had disappeared before I was even born. All I knew about him was that his name was James, and he'd promised her the world before leaving her with nothing but me. Everything changed when Richard walked into our lives. I was 15, doing homework at a corner booth in the diner where Mom worked when he first appeared. He wore a suit that probably cost more than our monthly rent and drove a silver Mercedes that gleamed under the streetlights. He started coming in every evening, always sitting in Mom's section, always ordering the same coffee and pie while barely touching either. His attention was focused entirely on her, and I watched my mother transform under his gaze. She started wearing lipstick again, laughing at his jokes, staying late to talk with him after her shift ended. Richard was everything Mom had never had. He owned a chain of car dealerships across Pennsylvania and New Jersey, lived in a house with a pool, and traveled to places we'd only seen in magazines. He brought her flowers, real roses, from a florist, not the grocery store kind. He bought her jewelry that she'd hide in her dresser drawer, taking it out to admire when she thought I wasn't looking. When he started taking her out on her nights off, she'd spend hours getting ready, trying on different outfits, asking me if she looked okay. I'd never seen her care so much about her appearance. At first, I was happy for her. She deserved someone who treated her well after all those years of struggling alone. But as weeks turned to months, something shifted. She started coming home later and later, sometimes not until morning. She missed our Friday movie nights, forgot to ask about my school projects, and stopped cooking dinner most nights. When I tried to talk to her about it, she'd wave me off, saying I was being dramatic. She'd tell me that Richard was showing her a different world, one where she didn't have to worry about counting pennies or working double shifts. She said I'd understand when I was older, that sometimes adults needed to prioritize their own happiness. The morning everything fell apart started like any other Monday. I woke up for school to find Mom's suitcases by the front door. She was sitting at our small kitchen table with Richard beside her, his hand over hers. The coffee maker was gurgling, filling the apartment with its familiar smell. But nothing else felt familiar. Mom's eyes were red, and she couldn't quite meet my gaze when she started talking. She told me that Richard had asked her to move to California with him. His business was expanding to the West Coast, and he wanted her with him. She spoke quickly, like she'd rehearsed the words, telling me about the house they'd have in San Diego, the pool, the ocean view, the fresh start. When I asked where I fit into this fresh start, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. Richard cleared his throat and mentioned something about good schools in the area, but Mom cut him off. She said I was 16 now, practically an adult. I'd be 17 in just 8 months. Lots of kids my age were already independent. She'd already talked to the landlord about keeping my name on the lease. She was leaving me $500, enough for groceries and utilities for a while. She'd call every week, send money when she could. This was temporary, she insisted, just until things were settled with Richard's divorce. That's when I learned Richard was still married. His wife lived in their main house in Princeton, while he had an apartment in the city. He promised Mom the divorce would be final within the year, that his wife was being unreasonable about the settlement, but it would all work out. Mom believed every word. I stood there in my pajamas, my mouth hanging open, trying to process that my mother was leaving me for a married man she'd known for less than 6 months. I begged her to reconsider. I promised I'd be less trouble, wouldn't complain about her being out late, would cook my own meals and do all the cleaning. I told her I needed her, that I couldn't do this alone. She stood up, then finally looking at me directly, and said something I'll never forget. She said she'd sacrificed everything for me for 16 years. She'd given up her youth, her dreams, her chances at happiness. Now, it was her turn. She deserved to be loved, to be taken care of, to not wake up every morning worried about money. She said I was strong, stronger than she'd ever been, and I'd be fine. Richard stood up, checking his watch, saying they needed to leave for the airport. Mom hugged me, a quick, desperate embrace that felt more like she was convincing herself than comforting me. She pressed the $500 into my hand, along with a piece of paper with her new phone number. She promised she'd call as soon as they landed, that this wasn't goodbye, just a see you later. Then she picked up her suitcases, Richard carried the rest, and they walked out the door. I stood at the window watching them load everything into his Mercedes. Mom never looked back, not once. The car pulled away, and just like that, I was alone. The first night alone, I sat on the couch waiting for the phone to ring. She'd said she would call when she landed, and I calculated the flight time, adding an hour for getting to their new place. The phone stayed silent. I made myself a can of soup for dinner, but couldn't eat more than a few spoonfuls. The apartment felt enormous without her presence, every small sound amplified in the emptiness. I left all the lights on and eventually fell asleep on the couch, still in my school clothes, the phone clutched in my hand. The next morning, reality hit. I had to go to school and pretend everything was normal. I couldn't tell anyone that my mother had abandoned me because Child Protective Services would get involved, and I'd end up in foster care. So I put on my brave face, went to classes, and told my friends that Mom had gotten a temporary job transfer to California. They bought it easily enough. Everyone knew we'd been struggling financially, so a better job opportunity made sense. My best friend Kate offered to have me stay at her house, but I declined, saying Mom had arranged for me to check in with the neighbors. 2 weeks passed before Mom finally called. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I'd just gotten home from school. Her voice sounded different, lighter, like she'd shed years of weight. She gushed about the house Richard had rented right on the beach, with palm trees in the yard, and a pool that overlooked the ocean. She talked about the weather, the restaurants, the shopping, everything except asking how I was doing. When I finally got a word in to tell her the electricity bill was due and I didn't have enough money, she got quiet. Then she said Richard was handling the finances now, and she'd have to ask him about sending money. She promised to call back the next day with a solution. She didn't call for another week. The $500 disappeared faster than I'd imagined. Rent was $450, which I managed to negotiate with the landlord, convincing him to let me pay in installments. Groceries, even buying just the basics, ate through another $100. The electricity bill was $60. The phone bill was $40. By the end of the first month, I was completely broke, with no idea how I'd pay next month's rent. I started skipping lunch at school, telling friends I was trying to lose weight. I'd pocket the rolls from the cafeteria when no one was looking, saving them for dinner. Finding a job became my sole focus outside of school. I walked into every store, restaurant, and business within walking distance of our apartment. Most places turned me away immediately when they found out I was only 16. The ones that didn't require legal guardians to sign work permits. I tried forging Mom's signature at a fast food place, but they called the number I'd given as hers, which was actually just our home phone, and when I answered, they figured out the truth. Finally, after 3 weeks of searching, a small diner 10 blocks away agreed to hire me under the table. The owner, Tony, was an older Italian man who didn't ask too many questions. He needed someone to wash dishes and bus tables during the evening shift from 5 in the evening until 1 in the morning. The work was brutal. The industrial dishwasher filled the back kitchen with steam, that made my clothes stick to my skin within minutes. The plates came in endless waves covered in grease and half-eaten food that made my stomach turn. My hands developed blisters that burst and reformed daily, even with the rubber gloves. The busboy who was supposed to help me quit after my second day, so I had to do both jobs racing between the dining room and the kitchen. Tony paid me $4 an hour cash below minimum wage, but I couldn't complain. It was enough to keep the lights on and buy ramen noodles and peanut butter. Going to school after working until 1 in the morning became increasingly impossible. I'd get home at 1:30, shower, off the smell of grease and dish soap, start homework at 2, and fall asleep at my desk by 3. My alarm went off at 6:30, giving me just enough time to get dressed and run to school. I started sleeping through my morning classes, my head dropping to my desk before I even realized my eyes were closing. Teachers began noticing. My English teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, kept me after class to ask if everything was okay at home. I lied, saying Mom was working nights and I was having trouble sleeping. She suggested I talk to the school counselor, but I managed to convince her I was fine. My grades plummeted from A's and B's to D's and F's. I couldn't concentrate on lessons when all I could think about was whether I'd make enough tips to cover the gas bill. Homework became impossible when I was working 60 hours a week. The counselor finally called me in after progress reports went out. She had my file open on her desk, pointing out the dramatic change in my academic performance. She asked about my mother, saying she'd tried to call the contact number, but it was disconnected. I told her Mom had gotten a new phone, and I'd forgotten to update the records. She looked skeptical, but gave me forms to have my mother fill out and sign. I knew I couldn't keep up the charade much longer. Something had to give, and unfortunately, it was school. I made the decision to drop out just before Thanksgiving. I forged Mom's signature on the withdrawal papers, claiming we were moving to California to join her there for a new job opportunity. The administration seemed relieved to have an explanation for my declining performance. On my last day, I cleaned out my locker, threw away textbooks I'd never open again, and walked out of the building where I'd once imagined graduating with honors. Instead of grief, I felt relief. Now I could pick up day shifts at another restaurant. The second job came from a Greek diner across town that needed morning prep and lunch service help. The owner, Stella, was a tough woman in her 60s who worked me hard but fair. She taught me to prep vegetables with speed and precision, to work the griddle during the breakfast rush, to balance multiple orders without losing my mind. Between the two jobs, I was working nearly 80 hours a week, making just enough to cover rent, utilities, and basic food. I learned to survive on restaurant leftovers and mistakes food that would have been thrown out anyway. 3 months into this routine, Uncle William found me. He came into Tony's diner one night dressed in his usual business casual, looking completely out of place among the late-night truckers and shift workers. I was carrying a bus tub full of dirty dishes when I saw him, and I froze. He was my father's younger brother, someone I'd only met a handful of times at family gatherings when I was much younger. After Dad died when I was 2, Mom had cut off most contact with his family, saying it was too painful. But William had sent birthday cards every year, with $20 bills tucked inside, the only acknowledgement I got from that side of the family. He took one look at me in my stained apron, my hair pulled back in a greasy ponytail, my eyes surrounded by dark circles, and his face went through several emotions. Shock, confusion, then anger. He waited until I had a break, then pulled me aside. He asked where Margaret was, why I was working here instead of being in school. I tried to lie, but I was too exhausted to make it convincing. The truth spilled out in a rush, and I watched his jaw clench tighter with each detail. William immediately offered to take me in. He lived alone in a large house in the suburbs, his wife having passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. They'd never had children, something he said was his biggest regret. But I was too proud and too damaged to accept. I'd learned not to depend on anyone, and the thought of being a burden to someone else made me feel sick. I told him I was managing fine on my own. He didn't push, but he started showing up regularly. He'd come for coffee during slow periods, always leaving $20 or $30 tips. He'd bring bags of groceries and leave them by my apartment door. Once I found an envelope with $500 under my door, with a note that just said, "For emergencies." More importantly than the money William gave me, something I'd lost, someone who cared about my existence. He'd ask about my day, remember things I'd told him, offer advice when I asked for it. He told me stories about my father filling in gaps Mom had never bothered to address. Apparently, my father had been brilliant, full of life and ambition before the car accident that killed him. William said I reminded him so much of his brother. The same determination, the same stubborn streak, the same refusal to give up even when things seemed impossible. Those conversations during quiet moments at the diner became my lifeline proof that I wasn't completely alone in the world. By the time I turned 18, I developed a rhythm to my survival. Work, sleep, with occasional moments to do laundry or buy groceries. But William's constant encouragement had planted a seed. He kept telling me I was too smart to waste my life in diners, that I needed to think about my future beyond next month's rent. He brought me GED study guides, leaving them on the counter with his excessive tips. At first, I ignored them, too exhausted to even consider adding studying to my plate. But during slow afternoons at Stella's, I started flipping through them. The material wasn't as hard as I'd expected, and I realized that despite dropping out, I'd retained more than I thought. I started studying during every free moment. While waiting for the dishwasher cycle to finish, I'd review math problems. During my break between jobs, I'd read through science sections. William would quiz me when he visited, turning it into a game where correct answers earned extra tip money. It took 6 months of studying, but I finally felt ready to take the test. The day of the exam, William drove me to the testing center, waited in the parking lot the entire 4 hours, and took me to a real restaurant afterward to celebrate. When the results came back showing I'd passed with high scores, I cried for the first time since Mom left. William hugged me and said my father would have been proud. With my GED in hand, William pushed me toward community college. He offered to pay for it entirely, but I compromised, agreeing to let him cover books while I paid tuition from my savings. I enrolled in night classes for business administration, choosing it because it seemed practical and could lead to a stable office job. The first semester nearly broke me. Working full-time while taking 4 classes felt impossible. I'd fall asleep over textbooks, write essays on my breaks at work, take exams on 3 hours of sleep. But I persevered, driven by a determination to prove wrong everyone who'd written me off. During my second semester, I met Jennifer in my accounting class. She was older, 25, returning to school after her divorce. We bonded over coffee during a group project, and she became my first real friend since leaving high school. When she learned about my situation, she insisted on introducing me to her family. Her parents, Robert and Linda, lived in a big house in the suburbs with their 3 younger children. They started inviting me to Sunday dinners, treating me like another daughter without any questions or judgment. Linda would pack me leftovers that lasted for days, while Robert would help me with my business statistics homework. Jennifer's family showed me what I'd been missing: a support system that existed simply because they chose to care. They came to my community college graduation, cheering louder than anyone when I walked across the stage with my associate degree. Linda took pictures like a proud mother, and Robert slipped me an envelope with $1,000 and a note that said, "For university applications." That's when I knew I could dream bigger than just survival. I applied to the State University's business program, writing an essay about overcoming adversity that made the admissions counselor cry during my interview. With my community college grades and compelling story, I earned a partial scholarship that covered 60% of tuition. William insisted on covering the rest, refusing to take no for an answer. At 22, 6 years after being abandoned, I moved into a dorm room and became a full-time college student for the first time. University challenged me in ways I hadn't expected. I was older than most of my classmates, with life experiences they couldn't fathom. While they complained about cafeteria food, I remembered eating ramen for weeks straight. While they stressed about papers, I remembered working 20-hour shifts. This perspective made me focused in a way that set me apart. I joined the business club, networked relentlessly, and applied for every internship available. By junior year, I'd landed a paid internship at a marketing firm downtown, where my work ethic immediately caught attention. The CEO of the firm, Patricia Mills, became my mentor. She saw something in me that reminded her of herself, another woman who'd fought her way up from nothing. She gave me real responsibilities, not just coffee runs and filing. I managed social media campaigns, assisted with client presentations, and learned the ins and outs of corporate marketing. When I graduated summa cum laude at 23, Patricia offered me a full-time position as a marketing coordinator, with a salary that seemed impossible to someone who'd once survived on $4 an hour. My first real paycheck felt surreal. After taxes, it was more than I used to make in a month of washing dishes. I found a small studio apartment in a safe neighborhood, furnished it with secondhand furniture that I painted and restored myself. For the first time in 7 years, I had a real home that was truly mine. William helped me move in, and we sat on my secondhand couch eating Chinese takeout while he told me again how proud he was. That night after he left, I called Mom's old number, which had been disconnected for years. I just wanted to tell someone who should have cared that I'd made it. Mom had reached out sporadically over the years, usually around holidays or my birthday, sometimes remembering, sometimes not. The calls always followed the same pattern. She'd ask how I was doing in a voice that suggested she was fulfilling an obligation. She'd tell me about her life with Richard, the vacations, the new car, the country club membership. She never asked if I needed anything, never offered to visit, never apologized for leaving. When I told her I was in college, she sounded surprised, as if she'd expected me to still be that lost 16-year-old she'd abandoned. When I was 25, she called with news that changed our dynamic forever. She was pregnant. At 42, she was having another child with Richard, who had finally divorced his first wife after a lengthy legal battle. She gushed about nursery decorations and baby names with an enthusiasm she'd never shown for any of my achievements. She mentioned they were having a boy, Tyler, and Richard was over the moon about having a son to carry on his legacy. The way she talked about this baby with such joy and anticipation crushed something inside me. She could be maternal, she could be excited about motherhood. She just hadn't been with me. The marketing firm grew rapidly and my role expanded with it. By 27, I'd been promoted to marketing manager, overseeing a team of 5 and managing major accounts. My salary had doubled, and I finally felt financially secure for the first time in my life. I bought my first car, nothing fancy, just a reliable Honda, but it was mine. William and I had dinner every Wednesday night, a tradition we'd maintained since college. He'd become the parent I'd needed, offering advice, celebrating victories, and providing the unconditional support Mom never had. My personal life flourished too. I dated occasionally, though trust came hard after Mom's abandonment. I made close friends at work, people who knew my story and respected my journey. I volunteered at a youth shelter on weekends, mentoring teenage girls who'd been kicked out or abandoned. Seeing their faces scared and trying to be brave reminded me of myself at 16. I could offer them what William had offered me, proof that survival was possible, that abandonment didn't define your worth. When Tyler turned 1, Mom sent an invitation to his birthday party. It came on expensive stationery with professional photos of their perfect family. Richard in his suit, Mom in designer clothes, baby Tyler in an outfit that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. After much deliberation and against my better judgment, I decided to attend. Maybe seeing me successful would give Mom some peace, or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I'd truly moved on. The party was at their house in San Diego, a massive Mediterranean-style villa, with ocean views and an infinity pool. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway, and caterers in white uniforms circulated with champagne and appetizers. I felt out of place immediately in my department store dress among the country club crowd. Mom greeted me at the door with an awkward hug, introducing me to guests as my daughter from my first marriage, a lie that stung since she'd never married my father. Richard shook my hand formally like I was a business acquaintance rather than his partner's daughter. The contrast was devastating to watch. Mom hovered over Tyler constantly, adjusting his outfit, wiping his face, taking endless photos. She spoke to him in baby talk, showering him with the affection and attention I'd craved as a child. When Tyler started crying, she immediately scooped him up, soothing him with practiced ease. She'd become the mother I'd always wanted her to be, just not for me. Richard clearly adored both of them, his hand constantly on Mom's back, his eyes following Tyler's every movement. They were the perfect family unit, and I was the uncomfortable reminder of Mom's past. During cake time, I overheard Mom telling another guest about Tyler's nursery, how she'd spent months designing it, choosing every detail to be perfect for her precious boy. The woman asked if this was her first child, and Mom hesitated for just a second before saying yes. That single word shattered any remaining hope I'd held for reconciliation. I wasn't just abandoned anymore, I was erased. I left immediately after driving the 6 hours back to Philadelphia, in tears, finally accepting what William had told me years ago. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up. The next few years, I threw myself into work with renewed determination. By 30, I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small condo in a nice neighborhood. William helped me move, joking that he was getting too old for heavy lifting, even though he was only 58 and in better shape than most people half his age. My career continued to soar, and I was headhunted by a larger firm offering a senior management position with a six-figure salary. Mom called to congratulate me when she heard through mutual acquaintances, but the conversation felt hollow, like she was checking off a box labeled parental duties. Then, just after my 31st birthday, William called with news that changed everything. He'd been feeling tired lately, losing weight without trying, and his doctor had run some tests. Pancreatic cancer stage 4 already spread to his liver. The prognosis was 3 to 6 months. I remember dropping my phone, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing in my silent apartment. The one person who'd chosen to love me, who'd been my real family, was dying. I took a leave of absence from work immediately, moving into William's guest room to care for him. He protested at first, saying he didn't want to be a burden, but I reminded him of all the times he'd refused to let me push him away when I needed help. Those months were simultaneously the hardest and most precious of my life. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing. He told me stories about my father I'd never heard about, their childhood, their dreams, their plans, before the accident. He shared his own regrets, mainly not having children, but said I'd filled that void in ways I'd never know. As William got weaker, he started putting his affairs in order. He mentioned updating his will several times, always with a mysterious smile, when I told him not to worry about such things. He'd say he wanted to make sure everything was handled properly, that the people who deserved it got what they should. I assumed he meant his business partners or distant relatives I'd never met. He never mentioned Margaret, and I never brought her up, knowing she'd cut him off the same way she'd cut me off. The last week was the worst. Hospice came to the house, setting up equipment that made everything feel final. William could barely speak, but he'd hold my hand while I read to him from his favorite books. On his last day, he woke up surprisingly lucid. He looked at me with clear eyes and said he was proud of the woman I'd become, that my father would have been too. He said I'd given him purpose in his final years, a chance to be the father figure he'd always wanted to be. He told me to stay strong for what was coming, though I didn't understand what he meant. That night, with me holding his hand, William passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was small but meaningful. William's business associates came along with employees who'd worked for him over the years. They all knew who I was, William's girl, as they called me. Person after person told me how much William had talked about me, bragged about my accomplishments, showed pictures from my graduations. His lawyer, Mr. Johnson, approached me after the service, handing me a business card and asking me to call his office the following week about William's estate. I assumed there might be some small bequest, maybe enough to cover the income I'd lost taking time off work. 2 weeks later, Mr. Johnson called with unexpected news. There were other beneficiaries named in William's will who needed to be present for the reading. When I asked who, he hesitated before saying Margaret Thompson and Tyler Richardson, my mother and half-brother. I couldn't understand why William would include them when he'd had no contact with Margaret for over 15 years. Mr. Johnson explained that the will had specific conditions that required all parties to be present. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I agreed to attend the reading scheduled for the following Monday. I arrived at Mr. Johnson's office 30 minutes early, needing time to compose myself before facing Mom again. The waiting room was all leather chairs and dark wood, the kind of place that whispered old money and serious business. I chose a seat facing the door, wanting to see them arrive to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. My hands shook slightly as I pretended to read a magazine, the words blurring together as my mind raced through possibilities. They arrived exactly on time, Richard leading the way with his hand on Mom's back, Tyler trailing behind, absorbed in his phone. Mom had aged in the 5 years since Tyler's birthday party, her face showing lines that expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. She'd had work done her lips fuller, her forehead unnaturally smooth, but it gave her an artificial look that made her seem like a stranger. Tyler, now 16, the same age I'd been when Mom left, looked exactly like Richard, tall and lean, with perfect teeth and an expensive haircut. He wore designer clothes that probably cost more than I made in a month at the diner. Mom's eyes widened when she saw me, and for a moment, her carefully composed expression cracked. She recovered quickly, painting on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked over, arms extended like she expected a hug, saying how wonderful it was to see me, calling me sweetheart like we had some normal mother-daughter relationship. I stood but didn't embrace her, offering a polite nod instead. Richard barely acknowledged me, giving a curt nod before checking his phone. Tyler looked up long enough to mutter something that might have been hello before returning to his screen. We sat in awkward silence until Mr. Johnson called us into his office. The conference room was imposing, with a long mahogany table and oil paintings of stern-looking men on the walls. Mr. Johnson, an older gentleman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gestured for us to sit. Mom and her family took one side of the table. I took the other, the physical divide reflecting our emotional one. Mr. Johnson sat at the head, opening a thick folder with William's will. He began with the standard legal language, confirming William's identity, his soundness of mind, the date of the will's last revision. Then he started listing assets, and I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. William's estate was far larger than any of us had imagined. The logistics company he'd built from nothing was valued at $3 million. There was the house worth $800,000 plus investment properties I hadn't known about. Cash accounts totaling 2 million, stock portfolios worth another million. Nearly $7 million in total assets. Mr. Johnson continued reading William's words, his voice steady and professional. To my beloved niece, Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, who became the daughter I never had, and who showed me what true strength looks like in the face of abandonment, I leave the following. Mom shifted in her seat at the word abandonment, but Mr. Johnson continued. The entirety of Thompson Logistics Incorporated to be transferred immediately upon my death. My primary residence at 42 Maple Drive and all contents within. 90% of all cash accounts and investment portfolios to be distributed as she sees fit. The room erupted. Mom shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. Her face flushed red and her voice cracked as she shouted that this was impossible, that she was William's sister by marriage, that family blood should matter. Richard slammed his hand on the table, his composure finally cracking as he declared this was clearly undue influence, that they would contest this will in court. Tyler, suddenly interested, looked up from his phone, with his mouth hanging open, muttering something about millions of dollars. Mr. Johnson raised his hand for silence, his expression unchanged, like he'd expected this reaction. He continued reading, his voice cutting through their protests. To Margaret Thompson and Tyler Richardson, I leave 5% each of the remaining cash and investment accounts, approximately $150,000 per person. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing with the condition that would change everything. However, this bequest to Margaret Thompson is contingent upon the following requirement. She must write in her own hand a letter of apology to Sarah Thompson for abandoning her at age 16. This letter must be read aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries and the executor of this estate. Mom's face went white, then red again. She sank back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Richard immediately started arguing about coercion and manipulation, throwing around legal terms like he knew what they meant. Tyler was calculating on his phone, muttering about how 5% wasn't fair when he was actual family. The irony of a 16-year-old boy calling himself actual family, while sitting next to the mother who'd abandoned me at the same age, wasn't lost on me. Mr. Johnson then produced a tablet, explaining that William had recorded a video message to be played during the reading. The screen flickered to life, and there was William, thin from cancer, but still dignified, sitting in his study just weeks before his death. His voice, though weak, was clear. If you're watching this, it means you're all together in one room, probably for the first time in over a decade. Margaret, I know you're angry. You always did have a temper when things didn't go your way, but you need to understand why I've done this. William continued, his eyes focused directly on the camera. When you left Sarah at 16, you didn't just abandon a child. You abandoned your responsibility, your duty as a mother, and you did it for money. You chose a man with wealth over a daughter who needed you. The irony is that Sarah, without any help from you, has become more successful, more accomplished, and more worthy of respect than you ever gave her credit for. She worked 18-hour days washing dishes to pay rent while you were shopping on Rodeo Drive with another woman's husband's money. Mom flinched at every word, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. William's message continued relentlessly. I watched Sarah struggle, survive, and ultimately thrive without you. She earned her education while working full-time. She built a career from nothing. She became someone remarkable not because of you, but in spite of your absence. This will isn't about punishment, Margaret. It's about justice. Sarah deserves what I'm leaving her because she was the family who showed up, who cared, who spent my final months by my side while you were too busy with your new family to even know I was dying. The video ended with William looking tired but resolute. Sarah, my dear girl, you were never a burden to me. You were a gift. You showed me what my brother's daughter could become with just a little support and a lot of determination. The money and business are just things, but I hope they give you the security your mother stole from you when she walked out that door. Be well, stay strong, and remember that family is about who chooses to stay, not who shares your blood. The room fell silent except for the sound of Mom's sharp breathing. She looked older suddenly, the weight of William's words aging her before our eyes. Tyler was staring at me now, really seeing me for the first time, trying to reconcile the woman who just inherited millions with whatever story Mom had told him about his older half-sister. Richard had gone quiet, his businessman's mind probably calculating whether a legal challenge was worth pursuing against such clear documentation. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat, bringing us back to the present. He placed a piece of paper and a pen in front of Mom. Mrs. Thompson, or should I say Mrs. Richardson now, if you wish to receive your bequest, the letter must be written now in this office and read aloud. You have 30 minutes to complete it. If you choose not to comply, your portion will be added to charity donations specified in a codicil. Mom stared at the blank paper like it was a snake about to strike. Mom picked up the pen with trembling fingers, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. For several minutes, she just stared at the paper, and I wondered if she'd actually walk away from $150,000 rather than apologize. Then, with jerky movements, she began to write. The scratching of pen on paper was the only sound in the room. Tyler had put his phone away, watching his mother with an expression I couldn't read. Richard sat rigid, his jaw clenched, probably calculating how much they needed that money. After 20 minutes, Mom set the pen down. Mr. Johnson asked her to read what she'd written. She lifted the paper with shaking hands, her voice barely above a whisper at first. Dear Sarah, I am sorry for leaving you when you were 16 years old. It was wrong of me to abandon you to pursue my own happiness. I should have been a better mother. I was selfish and thought only of myself and what Richard could provide for me. I know this apology comes too late, and only because I'm being forced to give it, but I want you to know that I have thought about you over the years. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. I told myself you were strong enough to handle being alone, that you were almost an adult anyway. I see now that I was just making excuses for my own terrible choices. You deserved better than a mother who would choose a man and his money over her own daughter. I cannot undo what I did, and I know this apology cannot heal the wounds I caused. I am sorry, Sarah. Signed, Margaret Richardson. The words hung in the air like a confession at a trial. Mom set the paper down, unable to meet my eyes. For 16 years, I'd imagined this moment, dreamed of hearing her acknowledge what she'd done. But now that it was happening, it felt hollow. These weren't words of genuine remorse, but a transaction, an apology purchased for $150,000. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat, perhaps beginning to understand that the mother he'd known his whole life had another story, another child she'd left behind. I stood slowly, finally ready to speak. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected, years of business presentations having taught me to hide my emotions when necessary. You know what the saddest part is, Margaret? I used her first name deliberately, watching her flinch. I would have forgiven you freely if you just once in 16 years called to genuinely ask how I was doing. If you'd shown even a moment of real concern for the daughter you abandoned. But every call was about you, your new life, your happiness, your new family. I walked around the table, standing where she had to look at me. When I was washing dishes until my hands bled, you were getting manicures. When I was sleeping in a storage room because I couldn't afford heat in the apartment, you were complaining about your pool being too cold. When I was eating ramen for the 10th day straight, you were posting pictures from five-star restaurants on the Facebook account you didn't think I knew about. You weren't just absent Margaret. You were living the life you thought you deserved while I struggled to survive. Tyler spoke for the first time, his voice defensive but uncertain. Mom deserved to be happy too. She couldn't sacrifice everything for you forever. The words were so similar to what Mom had said 16 years ago that I almost laughed. Instead, I turned to him, seeing myself at his age young and certain that the world revolved around him. Tyler, you're 16 now, right? The same age I was when your mother left me with $500 and a disconnected phone number. Can you imagine waking up tomorrow and having to figure out how to pay rent, buy food, keep electricity on all while trying to finish high school? Can you imagine doing that while your mother posts pictures with her new son, calling him her greatest joy, her reason for living, all the things she never called you? His face flushed, and he looked down at his hands. I could see him trying to process this information, reconciling it with whatever narrative Mom had created about her past. Richard tried to interject something about dwelling on the past, but I wasn't finished. You want to know the real tragedy here, Richard? It's not that she left me for you and your money. It's that she was actually a good mother once. She knew how to love a child, how to sacrifice, how to put someone else first. She just decided I wasn't worth it anymore when something better came along. And now you're all here demanding millions from an inheritance. You did nothing to earn from a man you never bothered to know, acting like you're the victims. I picked up the letter Mom had written, holding it up to the light. This apology means nothing to me. You can have your money, Margaret. Consider it payment for the greatest gift you ever gave me, teaching me that I didn't need you, teaching me that I was strong enough to build a life without a mother, teaching me that family isn't about blood, but about who shows up when life gets hard. William showed up. You ran away. With deliberate movements, I tore the letter in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces fall onto the mahogany table. Mr. Johnson, please ensure their checks are cut immediately. I want no reason for further contact. I turned back to Mom one last time. You know what William told me during his last days? He said I was the daughter he never had, but always wanted. He said my father would have been proud of who I became, the things a parent should say, the things you never did. Mom's composure finally shattered completely. Tears ran down her face, leaving tracks in her foundation. But were they tears of remorse or tears of frustration at not getting more money? I'd never know. And I realized I didn't care. Richard stood pulling Tyler up with him, muttering something about lawyers and contesting the will. Tyler looked back at me, once something like understanding in his eyes, before his father ushered him out. Mom stood slowly gathering her purse with shaking hands. She paused at the door, turning back to face me. For a moment, she looked like the mother I remembered from before Richard, tired and worn but real. Sarah, she started, but I held up my hand. Don't, please don't. 16 years too late, Margaret. Anything you say now is 16 years too late. She nodded once, accepting the finality in my voice, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, and just like that, she was gone from my life again. But this time, I was the one choosing the terms. Mr. Johnson waited a respectful moment before speaking. Ms. Thompson, would you like me to proceed with establishing the charitable fund with their portions? I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No, let them have it. But I do want to establish something else. A fund for teenagers who've been abandoned by their parents. Full scholarships, living expenses, counseling support. Everything I needed and didn't have. Call it the William Thompson Foundation for Abandoned Youth. He smiled, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. Mr. Thompson would have loved that. He spoke of you often, you know. Said you were proof that strength isn't inherited but earned. I'll have the paperwork drawn up this week. As I left his office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The money would provide security, but more importantly, William's business would give me the platform to help kids like I had been. The company employed 50 people, good people who'd respected William and would respect me if I proved myself worthy of his trust. I had work to do, a legacy to honor, and finally, truly, a family's love to carry forward. Even if that family had been just one person who chose to see my worth when my own mother couldn't. 6 months after the will reading, I had fully transitioned into running Thompson Logistics. The employees, some of whom had worked with William for 20 years, initially viewed me with skepticism. But when I spent my first month learning every role from warehouse operations to delivery routes, from customer service to accounting, they began to respect my dedication. I kept William's office exactly as he'd left it, adding only a photo of us from my college graduation on the desk. The business was solid, but I saw opportunities for growth that William, in his traditional ways, had missed. I implemented new technology systems, expanded our service area, and landed contracts with 3 major retailers. Revenue increased 30% in the first quarter under my leadership, but more importantly, I established benefits I wished I'd had during my struggling years: comprehensive health insurance, educational assistance, and emergency hardship funds for employees facing crisis. When one of our drivers faced eviction after his wife's cancer diagnosis, the fund covered their rent for 6 months. Watching his relief reminded me why William had trusted me with this responsibility. The William Thompson Foundation launched with an event at a downtown hotel. I'd expected modest attendance, but the ballroom filled with William's former associates, my colleagues from the marketing world, and surprisingly, Jennifer's entire family. We raised enough to fund 5 full scholarships that first night. I gave a speech about William, about abandonment, about the difference one person's kindness can make. I didn't mention Margaret by name, but anyone who knew our story understood the subtext. 3 months later, I received an unexpected visitor at the office. Tyler stood in my doorway looking uncomfortable in jeans and a regular t-shirt, instead of his usual designer clothes. He was alone. No Richard, no Margaret, just a 17-year-old boy with questions in his eyes. My assistant looked at me questioningly, but I nodded, inviting him in. He sat across from William's desk, taking in the modest office that controlled millions in assets. "Why are you here, Tyler?" I asked, genuinely curious. He fidgeted with his phone before setting it aside, a gesture that seemed significant for a teenager who'd been glued to it during our last encounter. "Dad's company went under," he said quietly. "Bad investments, lawsuits from former partners. We lost the house, the cars, everything except what Mom had hidden away. That $150,000 from Uncle William is all we have left." He paused, struggling with his next words. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. She and Dad are fighting constantly, blaming each other. She keeps saying she should have made different choices, but she won't say what choices." I studied him, this half-brother I'd never really known. "That's unfortunate, Tyler, but I'm not sure what you want from me. If you're here for money, the answer is no." He shook his head quickly. "That's not why I'm here. I wanted to understand. Mom never talked about you except to say you were from before Dad, that you lived with other family. But at the will reading, the things you said, and then I did research. I found old social media posts, news articles about the Youth Foundation. You really did all of that alone. Worked your way through school, built a career all after Mom left." "Yes," I said simply. "I did it because I had no choice. When you're 16 with no safety net, you either survive or you don't. I was lucky that William found me, that he cared enough to help without enabling. But mostly I survived because I refused to let your mother's abandonment define my worth." Tyler leaned forward, his young face serious. "I'm starting to see things differently. The way Mom hovers over me, controls everything, never lets me fail or struggle or learn. I thought it was love, but now I wonder if it's guilt. Like she's trying to prove she can be a good mother to someone." He met my eyes, and I saw genuine pain there. "I think she broke something when she left you, and she's been trying to fix it through me, but it's suffocating." Over the following weeks, Tyler kept visiting. He'd show up after school, sometimes doing homework in the break room, sometimes helping in the warehouse for pocket money. I insisted on paying him despite his protests. The employees adopted him quickly, teaching him to operate the forklift, letting him ride along on deliveries. He was discovering what I'd learned at his age, the dignity of honest work, the satisfaction of earning rather than being given. During one visit, he asked about William wanting to know about the great uncle he'd never met. I told him stories, showed him photos, shared the wisdom William had passed to me. Tyler absorbed it all with an intensity that surprised me. When he admitted he'd been thinking about college, but his parents wanted him to skip it and join what was left of Richard's business ventures, I offered to help him with applications. Not financially, I clarified, but with guidance, editing essays, choosing schools. He needed to earn his own way, but that didn't mean he had to do it alone. Margaret found out about his visits 3 months later. She called me for the first time since the will, reading her voice shrill with accusations. How dare I try to steal her son, poison him, against her turn him into another abandonment story. I let her rant, then calmly told her that Tyler was always welcome at Thompson Logistics, that he was learning valuable lessons about work and independence. If she had a problem with that, she could discuss it with him directly. The 17-year-old who'd sat sullenly at the will reading was becoming a young man with his own opinions. "You've ruined everything," she spat through the phone. "Richard barely speaks to me. Tyler questions everything I say. My life is falling apart, and you're just watching it happen, enjoying your revenge." "I'm not doing anything to you, Margaret," I replied evenly. "Your life is falling apart because you built it on a foundation of abandonment and lies. I'm living my life running Williams' company, helping kids who were abandoned like me. If Tyler chooses to spend time here, that's his choice. Something you should understand since you were so big on making choices for your own happiness." She hung up on me, but Tyler kept coming. He started volunteering at the foundation events, telling his own story of privilege and realization. He became a bridge to affluent donors who might not have understood abandonment from poverty, but could understand the abandonment of emotional neglect, of being a trophy child, of being loved conditionally based on performance and appearance. His presence helped us fund 3 more scholarships that year. The first recipient of the foundation's full scholarship was a girl named Maria, 17, living in a shelter after her parents kicked her out for getting pregnant. We covered her GED test, community college childcare, and living expenses. She sent me updates every month, photos of her daughter, grade reports showing straight A's. When she graduated with her associate degree in nursing, I attended the ceremony crying as she walked across the stage. William would have been so proud. A year after that first visit, Tyler graduated from high school. Neither Richard nor Margaret attended his graduation, too wrapped up in their messy divorce proceedings to prioritize their son's milestone. I went instead, bringing Jennifer and her family, the warehouse crew, and even gruff Tony from the diner where I'd first worked. Tyler teared up seeing us all there, understanding finally what chosen family meant. He'd earned a partial scholarship to State University, the same one I'd attended, planning to major in business with a minor in social work. That evening, after his graduation dinner at Jennifer's parents' house, Tyler pulled me aside. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Do you forgive her mom, I mean? After everything, do you forgive her?" I thought carefully before answering. "I forgave her years ago, Tyler, but not for her sake. I forgave her because holding on to that anger was poisoning my life. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life who's proven they'll hurt you. Your mother made her choice when she walked out on me at 16. Every day since then, she's remade that choice by never genuinely apologizing, never trying to repair what she broke. I've built a good life despite her absence. That's the best revenge and the best healing." Tyler nodded, understanding beyond his years. "I love her because she's my mom, but I see who she really is now. I don't want to become like her or Dad, thinking money and status matter more than people. I want to be like you and Uncle William, building something meaningful, helping others, choosing family based on love, not blood." As I drove home that night, I thought about the strange turns life takes. The woman who'd abandoned me had inadvertently given me a brother who chose to know me. The uncle I'd barely known had become my father figure and left me the means to change lives. The struggle of being abandoned had given me the strength to succeed and the empathy to help others. Every terrible thing had led to something better, not because suffering is noble, but because I'd chosen to transform pain into purpose. The foundation has now helped dozens of abandoned teenagers find their paths. The company has grown to employ over 100 people, all earning living wages with full benefits. Tyler works part-time during college breaks, learning the business from the ground up. He's decided he wants to be part of continuing William's legacy, but he'll earn his position like everyone else. No nepotism, no shortcuts, just honest work and genuine care for others. Margaret occasionally sends cards on holidays, generic things with pre-printed messages. I don't respond, but I don't throw them away either. They sit in a drawer, evidence of a relationship that exists only in her imagination. Richard disappeared after the divorce, probably chasing another wealthy woman with promises he won't keep. But their chaos no longer touches my life except through Tyler, and he's learned to separate their failures from his own journey. Looking back, I wouldn't change what happened. If Margaret hadn't abandoned me, I might never have known my own strength. I might never have found William, discovered my capacity for survival, or built this life of purpose and meaning. The 16-year-old girl crying in an empty apartment couldn't have imagined that abandonment would lead to abundance, not just of money, but of genuine connection, real family, and the ability to prevent other kids from facing that same isolation. Not everyone who gives birth to you deserves the title of mother, but if you're lucky, life sends you people who choose to love you when they don't have to. William chose me. Jennifer's family chose me. The employees who've become friends chose me. Tyler chose me. And most importantly, I chose myself every single day since that morning when I woke up alone at 16. Those are your real family, the ones who stay, who show up, who see your worth when others walk away. And sometimes being abandoned by one person leads you to find the ones who were meant to be there all along. The Foundation's latest project is a residential facility for abandoned teenagers, a place where they can live while finishing school, learning life skills, and healing from trauma. It will be called William House, and Tyler helped design it, making sure it feels like a home, not an institution. We're breaking ground next month on the anniversary of William's death, turning grief into hope, abandonment into sanctuary. I think about that scared 16-year-old girl sometimes washing dishes until her hands bled, wondering if she'd make rent. I wish I could tell her that it gets better, that the pain has purpose, that one day she'll stand in a boardroom making decisions that change lives. I wish I could tell her that the mother who left won't matter nearly as much as the uncle who stayed. Most of all, I wish I could tell her that being abandoned isn't the end of her story. It's the beginning of discovering just how strong she really is. But she figured it out on her own, one dish, $1, one day at a time. And that's the real inheritance William left me, not the money or the company, but the knowledge that I was worth saving, worth loving, worth choosing. Margaret may have given me life, but William and I gave each other family. And that's a fortune that can't be measured in dollars or demanded in conference rooms. It can only be earned through presence, patience, and the radical act of staying when everyone else walks away. What would you do if your mother abandoned you for money and then showed up years later demanding an inheritance she didn't earn? Have you ever had someone choose you when your own blood family wouldn't? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming abandonment and finding your chosen family. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that being left behind doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the family that chooses you is worth more than the one you were born into.